This example is the same one that we finished with at the end of the practice in the previous lesson, and I wanted to take some time to learn how to style this. Now, there's actually a bunch of different ways to style things in React, and we're going to start with the one that's probably the most familiar to you, and that's just using CSS classes and CSS rules on those classes. Let's drill down the tree here and see where we can actually start putting some classes. You'll see on my index.js, I'm rendering an app component. And the app component is rendering a div with 3 other components, a header, main content, and footer components. And each one of those is just a basic component that either has a single element as part of it with some text inside. Let's focus our efforts on styling the header. And normally what you do in HTML when you're going to add a class to something is you add a new property called class. Well, one thing we need to remember right here is that we're not actually dealing with HTML. Instead, we're dealing with a variation of JavaScript, JSX. And something you'll just have to remember with JSX is that using class as a property name doesn't really fly. Instead, we need to use something called class name with a capital N. A lot of places will tell you the reason that you have to do that is because class is a reserved keyword in JavaScript. But the truth is, underneath, JSX is just using the vanilla JavaScript DOM API. And if you've ever used the vanilla JavaScript DOM API, you'll have something like document.getElementById something. And if you wanted to add a class to that, you could say dot class name plus equals, and then add a new class name. I prefer class list myself because it has properties that you can use to add and remove classes, but that's beside the point. Class name is an underlying JavaScript DOM API property. And so using class name as part of our JSX is simply a way to access that DOM API under the hood, which is what JSX in React is doing. That's just a little bit of extra background that you may or may not be interested in knowing, but the point is all you need to do is wherever you normally would say class in HTML, use class name instead. Here I'm going to say class name equals navbar. And I'm going to delete this before it becomes a problem. Then over in my style.css, I just need to select .navbar and include whatever styles I want. For example, I might change the background color to purple. If I save and refresh this, you can see that now the background color is purple. I'm going to copy and paste in some styles since this isn't a course on CSS so that we can get something that actually looks pretty good. Okay, the only thing I've done here was added a 0 margin to the body so that it went all the way to the edge, and a number of styles to the navbar. If you're interested in actually checking this out, feel free to pause the video. But the point is, everything that you normally do in CSS is going to be essentially the same as you do here. The only change we've made so far, remember, is that we have to use class name instead of class. One of the other things to keep in mind that may be tricky to remember at first is that you can only apply the class name attribute to React elements like header or paragraph or h1. If you try to apply class name to a component that you've created, such as header or main content, it's going to do something a little bit different than you think. And we're going to talk more about that in the future. But for now, just remember that the only thing you can apply class name to are React elements and not React components. The things that look basically like regular HTML. Another thing that can be kind of tricky in the beginning is if you're using something that requires different levels of your tree hierarchy, like Flexbox or CSS Grid, where you need to know which items are the Flex container and which items are the Flex items. It can be tricky looking at your component to know exactly how that works. For example, if I wanted to make this div a Flex container, and I wanted to specifically style one of the items therein, I would need to go to the header component or the main content component and look at the elements therein in order to give them the class names that are necessary. For example, if I go to header.js, this header element will be the direct child of this div. Think of it as React taking the contents that this header component is returning and copying and pasting it into this place. When you create your React applications and you inspect with the dev tools, you'll see that this is actually how things end up in the DOM tree. So take some time to play with class name in this project. See if you can style the main section and the footer a little bit differently. And once you feel good, let's move on to the next lesson.